media. Today we have three great panelists with a great experience that will surely talk about interesting things. They know his biography very well, so I changed to speak Spanish to explain the audience in a Spanish way, okay? Alisa Zeisler, de Wall Street Journal, excuse me. Alisa tiene un máster en gestión por el London Business School y un BA con distinción en psicología y economía por la Universidad McGill. Actualmente es editora de investigación y desarrollo en Wall Street Journal, responsable de expandir el uso de la inteligencia artificial y las tecnologías de automatización en la redacción. Anteriormente ha trabajado para Barron, creando y liderando el equipo de desarrollo editorial. Actualizó la infraestructura en las operaciones de redacción y lanzó varios productos editoriales nuevos, incluidos podcasts, newsletters y vídeos. Después de Barron trabajó para Financial Times, donde fue miembro fundador del equipo de audiencia y de comunidades, con el encargo de evolucionar el Financial Times digitalmente y crear una cultura centrada en el cliente. Después, John Keefe, de Quartz Media, New York. John es periodista de investigación en la ciudad de Nueva York y es arquitecto técnico de bots y machine learning en Quartz. Quartz es un sitio web de temas económicos financieros. John es el líder del estudio de inteligencia artificial de Quartz con el objetivo de ayudar a los periodistas a utilizar el aprendizaje automático para investigar y buscar historias. También imparte clases sobre creación rápida de prototipos para nuevas ideas en tecnología periodística en la CUNY Graduate School de Periodismo. John es el autor de un libro titulado Proyectos familiares para objetos inteligentes, proyectos de mesa que responden a su mundo. Después, por último, Paul Chon, de la Knight Foundation. Paul es director de periodismo e innovación tecnológica en la Knight Foundation. Tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en la vanguardia de la transformación digital en la industria de los medios. Ha ayudado a empresas de medios a crear ideas innovadoras a través de nuevas plataformas tecnológicas, digitales y emergentes. Ha dirigido equipos interdisciplinares de periodistas, tecnólogos, científicos de datos y diseñadores, trabajando en compañías de medios de comunicación como NBC, News Digital, The Associated Press, de Miami Herald y de Wall Street Journal. En la Fundación Knight está desarrollando estrategias de inversión y potenciando la innovación y la sostenibilidad en el periodismo a través de la tecnología. I think the first is Paul.
Hi, good afternoon. So when we think about artificial intelligence in the news, in general, I think we all agree we hate using the word artificial intelligence because it means everything and nothing. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, I think in each one of us, we have a different interpretation. It could be a robot, it could be algorithm, it could be Alexa, it could be Google Assist, it could be YouTube, right? So when we think about artificial intelligence right now, it's sort of like a buzzy word to use. So it's sort of the catch-all phrase like technology. So what we've tried to do in this panel is be a little bit more precise with what do we mean by the application in terms of how do you use the application. At its core, AI is just really math. Like there's nothing glamorous about it. So it's just math. Okay, so in terms of journalism, in terms of using artificial applications, this is nothing new for us. So it's not like, 2019, suddenly we discovered this thing called AI and oh my gosh, everyone is using it and so must we. In fact, we've been deploying these applications since 2014. In 2014, the Los Angeles Times had developed a quick bot where they use that technology to publish earthquake stories within 3 minutes. after an earthquake had been identified. AP have been using, again, technology where they scrape the data, they structure the data, and they use automation technology to structure earning stories. So that increased the capacity from 300 articles to 3,700 articles per quarter in terms of businesses. In Washington Post at 2016, they had used heliograph to report sort of like results from the Olympics. So some of the early stages of using artificial intelligence technology really has a lot to do with outputting to stories. There are structured data, and we use natural language processing to sort of write a templated story. Once you have the data, you're able to output them to structure stories. So a lot of times when we talk about journalism and AI, a lot of folks that really think about is really the output of more content. But we have gone beyond that, right? We have gone beyond just outputting content. Now we could use technologies, the different branches of AI to do a lot of different things. At Reuters, they use AI technology to track, sort of like to use algorithm to score different events in breaking news so that they could really get a sense of which news are more worthy, right? So doing the score system. And that sort of like take the priority of having someone manually sort of follow up each Twitter, potential breaking news. You could also use it for media insights, right? So Washington Post have this knowledge map where they use this knowledge map to surface these personalized and content for their readers, right? Facebook used it to eliminate fake news potentially, and BBC had again really deployed the technology to track 850 RSS feeds so that they could really tag these articles. So you could see that they're using different components of AI from machine learning to natural language processing and different knowledge graphs to do tasks that would require a lot of people to do it, or to sort of reduce these tasks where it normally would take you hours and hours to become minutes and seconds. So we have really gone beyond just outputting story. So some of the questions that we really want to ask for you guys to go back to the newsroom when you think about artificial intelligence, the different branches of it, is what journalism tasks can be made more efficient because of this technology, right? So this is an important question to ask. And the second important question to ask is, how a newsroom using this technology to improve the quality of your journalism, right? So when we think about data journalism, you could use this technology as a way to glean insights, right? So where you normally have to have a big investigative team with tons and tons of data journalists, how are you pairing technology and human to produce a journalism that's faster and better? In fact, recently at the Knight Foundation, early in the year, we have really looked into the intersection of AI and the news, and we have ran a challenge where we have more than 500 different applicants from around the world applying for a grant. And out of that 500 applications, we funded 7 applications. And among 2 of them that could be super useful is one project that we funded is Chequiato, based in Argentina, where they have basically got a grant to uncover the ethics of AI in the misinformation space. And then the other project that we funded is for CUNY in New York, where they're basically working with different newsrooms to talk about how we could cover AI for the communities. So again, when we think about sort of AI, there's 2 prongs to it, right? Like, one, how could you use it internally as a tool? And also, how are you telling that story to your audience, right? Because right now, the technology basically tell you where to eat, what to read, what to shop, and even who to fall in love with, right? So a lot of times, if you don't understand this technology right now and you're not deploying with the newsroom, you're gonna have a hard time conveying that message back to your audience. So those 2 questions are pretty key in framing, and then John and Lisa will go a deeper dive in terms of how they actually apply the technology in a real life situation.
Well, as it's coming up, I'll start with an overview. So thank you for having me here. I am Elisa from the Wall Street Journal, and I work on the research and development team. So what that means is that we are a group of editors and technologists who work together within the actual newsroom to solve newsroom problems. We believe that AI and machine learning can allow newsrooms to analyze data, identify patterns and trends, and uncover hidden insights. For us, it's all about making decision-making faster, easier, and better. I want to start with a very specific problem that we had. We're audience-facing, so we start with the user need. The journal publishes hundreds of articles a day, and while we have real-time tools that helped our editors understand how content was performing and what they might want to write about, we didn't have a way to retain all the knowledge. We have hundreds of articles published every day, thousands of articles in a week, to really sort of give a macro overview of what we were doing. We on the team saw an opportunity to provide editors with this knowledge, to determine what and how we've covered, and potentially even highlight new and different insights. To do that, we needed to quantify our coverage. We used a language analysis methodology to turn all of our articles into representative numbers. This meant that we could actually assign numerical values and then look at the connections between the different articles, categorizing them. So for context, in typical metadata, you might have a story about Brexit. Using this, we can get quite a bit more nuance. So we know it's a news story about Brexit and the context of that story. This was really helpful in of itself, but quite hard to actually understand, right? It's a list of numbers. The next thing we did was to use something called a self-organizing map to turn it visual. So we take all of the dimensions, all of those numbers that make up a vector, and put it into this map, into a two-dimensional plane. Here you can see that the placement is very important of the different squares. The closer they are together, the more linked the two categories are. The darker the color, the more articles fit into one of those clusters. But this also, while interesting, gave an overview, not particularly useful in terms of day-to-day decision-making. The next thing we did was to create an interface for our reporters and editors. We linked what was that coverage map to the metrics we were already using, things like acquisitions, conversion rate, article length, et cetera, which meant that we could tie some of that perspective to actually what we can do for our business. In the end, we analyzed over 20,000 articles, about 1 year's worth of our journalism, and turned them into 361 hypergranular clusters. From there, we were able to analyze. We found that we supported our membership team by identifying different groups where we could support them more and apply them to members to get additional conversions. And we worked with editors to develop specific content briefs. In all, we found nearly 100 unique insights about our coverage. Now again, these insights in of themselves aren't particularly unique necessarily. We could have worked with our analysts to find bespoke coverage, to develop bespoke insights, but that would have taken quite a bit longer and may not have actually surfaced the exact same things. So what do we mean here by an insight? I have a few examples. That map, which organized our coverage, for instance, found that college planning and financial aid articles were actually quite close. In our heads in the newsroom, they weren't. Different sections of the newsroom actually publish them. Here, the journal report section and our personal finance section. Given this coverage map, we actually promote them together and have seen good results. Another example, we found that articles that discussed how AI is transforming various industries had a particularly high conversion rate when compared to articles discussing AI in of itself. We've since increased our coverage examining the effects of AI. Finally, climate change. It was predominantly covered by our politics and world sections, and we did not particularly cover it as a business or technology story. We found a gap in our coverage that we were able to amend. Recently, we found stories on green energy markets have converted particularly well and helped us to find new members. So this is just one use case of how we've been using different AI techniques to support our newsroom and aid that decision-making about what we cover. I just want to very quickly go over a few more examples. On the left, our Talk 2020 tool, we're actually gathering everything that a presidential candidate has said publicly since they began their life. This is helping our politics and elections team to quickly parse through different data and find how candidates have changed what they're saying over time. On the right, our MarketSpot tool, we're creating an alerting system that's personalized for the specific reporter or editor. So not only are we creating rule-based triggers around financial market moves, but we're using machine learning to make it so it's highly relevant to that individual's interests. Here, we also looked at another way to look at our coverage. We looked specifically at sourcing practices, and we are now able to see the male and female pronouns in our journalism, so we can again analyze our coverage that way. Here on the right are churn and propensity models, not a newsroom tool, but I did think was worth mentioning. We've used these same types of models to look at how we get subscribers and how we can keep our subscribers. And through them, you can see in 2016, that line, we've seen a huge increase in our subscription numbers since we started to implement these models. So again, finally, we see that there's a huge opportunity for AI in the Wall Street Journal. And these are just a few examples. Next, I think, comes how John and how AI is being used in reporting.
That's awesome, thanks. So I work at Quartz, and I work specifically, I have for the last year, in Quartz's AI studio. Quartz's AI studio is actually a project funded by Paul and the Knight Foundation yay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Knight Foundation, for helping journalists figure out ways that they can use machine learning in their stories and in their investigations. And when I say machine learning, this is a specific kind of AI that is about teaching a computer how to recognize something and then using that computer to do it on a bigger set of data. So if we can bring up my set of slides, that would be awesome. I can walk you through an example of this and some of the things one of the things that we're trying to do in the AI studio is help people recognize when machine learning might be useful to them. So it's one thing to use machine learning, but before you use it, you have to know when it might be useful. And it turns out that a lot of journalists we found haven't known when it's useful. So let's see if we can get the slides to come up. Here we go. There's me, there's the Knight Foundation. Okay, so the feelings that you feel or that your journalists might feel when AI might help them are kind of like these emoji, the crying, this too much work, it's crazy. And very specifically though, these are the kinds of feelings that journalists might have. We'll never be able to sort all these documents. There's too many documents, right? We'll never be able to read them all. It's a similar problem. Or we'll never be able to watch all of this video. If you can imagine getting maybe hundreds of hours of police video, you can't necessarily watch all of those in the time that you have. Or my eyes sting from looking at all these images. Looking through thousands of images can be very problematic. And there might be cases where you want to find more like this. You have something, a document or an image, and you want to find more like those in some sort of data set. And lastly, kind of a predictive way of going about machine learning. Something happened, there were signs that this was going to happen. Can I detect those signs in the future? So I can catch it next time it's going to happen. So these are some of the things that we can use machine learning on specific projects to help solve. And I'm going to tell you about one of them. This is a project that Quartz did with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ. You may have reporters and editors who are part of ICIJ. There were, I think, about 60 reporters and other journalists involved in this project. This was around a leak of 200,000 documents from a law firm in Mauritius. Mauritius, if you don't know, is a tax haven for a lot of multinational companies doing business primarily in Africa, but also in Asia and other parts of the world. So they're able to skirt taxes by paying them to Mauritius while doing business in these other countries. ICIJ, through a whistleblower, got 200,000 documents. That's even for 60 reporters, that's a lot of material to go through. So here's where machine learning comes in. So one standard way to go through this, imagine this is a pile of 200,000 documents. One way to go through this is using text searches, right? You could just run a very simple search engine and say, oh, I want to find anything that mentions tax return. Tax returns can be very, very informative. And what you get is any document that says tax return. So that's good, that's a lot of them. But it's not all of them, right? Because some of them might not say tax return. Some of them might say it in another language. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it got the documents blurry or it didn't quite work. We want to find those documents too, so how do you do that? What we can do is we can actually train a machine learning model, which is a little process that we've worked out the details of, and we can actually say, instead of saying the word tax return, we can say, here is what a tax return looks like. Give me all of the documents that look like this too. And what you end up with is, yes, the same ones that said tax return, but maybe some that don't quite say tax return. Maybe the characters were kind of messed up in the scanning. Maybe it's a tax return, but it doesn't say it. And in some cases, you'll get something like an invoice, which is not a tax return at all, because the machine learning models aren't perfect. I like to equate them to a room full of very eager but not very smart interns. And that's basically what it's like. And they'll get it wrong sometimes. But what we were able to do is we were actually able to find, in this case, actual tax returns that the reporters hadn't been able to find before. And that was able to lead to more insight for the investigation. So this is one example. We've been working with several organizations, including the BBC and some local newspapers, and our own Quartz journalists to work on stories like this, teaching computers to help us sort through large amounts of data. If you or your reporters and editors are interested, we're posting all of the information that we're doing, including examples of code and tools at a website called qz.ai. So you can write that down and bring it home. And we'll have more. This grant goes through January, and we're going to keep adding to this website. So please feel free to check that out or reach out if you have questions.
Any question?
Much time?
I actually was not at the Wall Street Journal when we did this, so I don't know how long it took, but you probably have a good idea for how long that type of thing would take.
To go through 20,000 articles. It depends on what you're looking for. The machine actually searching through it takes only a few seconds, actually. The harder part is training the model to understand the 200,000 documents. And I think that took us, we were working on it pretty steadily for about a week, a little bit longer. And that we were using existing libraries to help understand, to help train the model. So it takes a little while, but it takes a lot less time than having everybody go through, read all of those documents.
John, perhaps you could talk a little bit about, because when I'm thinking about training machines, it sounds really daunting, right? So who are these people that you're hiring that are training machines? Are they journalists? Are they technologists? So if I were my own outfit, I want to really apply machine learning or natural language processing, it's where do I go to hire these people? Where do I begin?
That's a really good question, and it's really challenging for journalism because the best machine learning and AI researchers end up going to places like Google and Facebook where they can make a lot of money. I think really the answer to that is that it's sort of the same people that you would hire for data journalism jobs, people who are good at coding but also understand journalism really, really well. And so there are journalism schools in the US and around the world that are focusing on data journalism. Those are the kinds of people who can actually do this machine learning. And in fact, what's really interesting, and I know this personally because I'm not a trained computer person, although I've self-taught over time. And 3 years ago, I could not do machine learning, and I tried. But advances have come along so far that the code and the libraries and the steps to do this have actually come a long way. So even just sort of those journalist programmers who are in so many newsrooms right now can pick up these methods without much work. It's actually a pretty exciting moment for this.
Sorry, I also just want to maybe add a footnote about potential bias that can enter into these algorithms. So depending on what data you're using to train them, bias can enter if you, for instance, don't have a diverse set of images and you're looking at images. So there's some complications there as well.
Yeah, I know in the US, there's quite a few collaborations within the university where you could see the journalism program are now pairing with the computer science program at different universities to really help train people who could do this, but for journalism, right? So at Stanford, they have a fellowship, the JSK Fellowship, and for the first time, they have a fellowship dedicated for AI, because we deem this is going to be a really important aspect of journalism within the next decade. Because right now, if you look at all the consumer devices from Alexa to Google Assist, like you could talk to your device right now to get content, and so much of these consumer products are being backed by some form of AI technology. So that's why at night we are choosing to look at this sector as really important, and how do we start the conversation, not just about sort of who's doing it, but what are some of the ethical guidelines of applying machine learning into your journalism.
One of the areas that we didn't touch on in the panel, but is also worth mentioning, is how are we reporting on algorithms? So one of the things we're doing at the Wall Street Journal is actually trying to reverse engineer what we're seeing in Google or on Facebook, so we can understand how algorithms on platforms are affecting the lives of the people around us.
And in our newsroom, we're finding that the reporters who are trying to use the machine learning and the AI themselves, even just to experiment a little, are better able to interview people and to sort of think about how to reverse engineer those algorithms, try to find the bias that police departments and banks and other organizations are the bias in the AI systems that they've purchased off the shelf.
I mean, I think if you have data journalists in your newsroom, in the US, we have NICAR, which is a conference in March where I know they've been sort of looking into how to train data journalism to use machine learning for their work, and also ONA also have some sessions. So if you have data in your newsroom, if you have data journalists in your newsroom and you want them to start really understanding this form of technology, I would highly encourage you to make that investment and send them to those conferences.
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize this. Question to the gentleman from Nike. Nike is a sportswear company, is it not?
No, we have foundation, so we
You're a foundation,
yeah.
but you are sponsored by the sportswear company?
No. We're not. It's not Nike.
Well, I stand corrected.
Ed McCullough, I have a question. I have two questions. I'll start with this one. If a correlation is found between a particular story, let's say Jeffrey Epstein, or it could be the missing Malaysian commercial jetliner, which is still missing, and a spike in reader interest or subscriptions, how might that influence subsequent coverage of that news story? And if I put it a different way, I mean, in the old days, a reporter might say, there's nothing new here. But now maybe in the interaction in the newsroom might be, maybe there's nothing new here. However, there is a spike, and we know for the first time, there's a spike in reader interest, audience, and possibly in subscriptions. Could you talk about the interaction of AI in the newsroom in that light?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the same refrain we've heard through the incorporation of like audience teams into newsrooms as well. We're sort of data informed, or in this case, machine informed, but not led. So these are really just tools that inform our editors and reporters and help them around their decision making. We're not at all prescriptive about it. And the Gender Me tool is a good example of that. You know, we're not saying necessarily that you as a reporter have to go source more women. We're saying, FYI, here's the habits that we're seeing.
Just one other note, if you want to use machine learning in the newsroom and you don't have any resources, there are vendors that do that. So when the AP did their automation for the earnings story, they partnered with a company called Automated Insights. So there are folks who do that. You just have to be really careful in terms of vetting them, right? Because, you know, a couple years ago, AI wasn't this buzzy word, but now like every vendor you talk to gonna say they're AI driven, right? So you really have to do your due diligence and really vet whether they're doing what we call like real AI or junk AI.
And that's happening at the AP and elsewhere, where they're using machine learning to do things like tag photos or identify scenes in different videos, or very, very common now is transcribing, right? Transcribing video or audio. So AP actually publishes transcripts of all of the video that it provides to their clients. Well, that's a big, long process. They now are using a company called Trint, T-R-I-N-T, to run those videos through an algorithm to then generate the transcripts.
I have a question, if possible. Correct me if I'm wrong, but usually companies invest in something because they want to monetize, or they expect some sort of return. And most of these decisions are money driving. When a company like yours invests in the artificial intelligence, what are they looking for? How they expect to monetize this type of investment? It's looking for more interactions with audience, with readers, more subscriptions, and how they manage that in order to get the objective, which is getting money in some ways, right? Any of them? Thank you.
All of the above, I would say. For us, we are newsroom based, which makes us a bit different than, for instance, a direct focus on subscriptions or retention. But yeah, we look at how we can create better products. I think an example is, for instance, the college rankings tool. We actually automated some of that. So we were able to create like 900 articles that actually allowed for comparisons between different schools, which made students, it was like easier for them to decide potentially where they wanted to go. And we saw, for instance, that compared to the year before had significantly more subscriptions. For us, it was about creating a better user experience, and we did that using AI techniques, but it was still about creating better journalism. It just happened to benefit subscriptions as well.
So the way you want to think about is when you make the investment, yes, at the end is for some kind of profit, but where does efficiency fits in to that profit, right? So for the AP, the reason why they went with Automated Insight, and when I was at the AP, I actually hired our first automation editor. Part of the reason is they don't have enough reporter to write 3,000 earnings articles, but the customers want all of these earnings articles. So it's a lost business opportunity when they don't have the human resources to produce it. So now with a combination of editors and machine, they're able to meet that business objective by saying that, you know, the reporters they have, they could do sort of the more important companies and the long form stories, while the machine and the editor that partner together could generate all of these stories that might not be glamorous for a journalist to write. Like no one born to say, I'm going to be the best earnings reporter in the world, but people do want that content. So how do you sort of factor that into your business efficiency? So I think a lot of this is really the way you measure it. It could be a membership, right? How do the story form into a membership conversion? Some are just really about how do you save resources within the process.
I would just add that at Quartz, we're taking what we learned in the AI studio to basically discover and report on stories that we couldn't do otherwise. I mean, and in journalism, that's super valuable. It translates to exclusives and stories that get attention, and then for us, that turns into subscriptions and members and ad sales. So we're really looking to find stories that we literally could not have done without the help of a machine learning model. So exclusives as a business model on the newsroom side is sort of what I'm into.
I have a question here. Al final de la sala creo que... I can ask a question now, right? Here? Okay, so
Whoever has the microphone.
basically there is a lot of all kind of sizes newsroom here, specifically in Latin America, small size newsrooms and small budget. So what advice would you give these newsrooms that have small budget in terms of what kind of software can they use, or what kind of technology can they use so they can apply these ideas, number one. And number two, how foundations like Knight Foundation is helping to support this kind of initiative for small newsrooms?
Well, and if you have reporters who are working on stories that might benefit from machine learning, they should call me. Because part of what we're doing under the Knight Foundation grant is to help people in small newsrooms actually do the story, not only train them how to use it. Although in a small newsroom, you might only have a story a year or two, or a couple stories a year that really, how often are they getting a pile of 200